I'm Brooke Neal, and here's my audience. Before 1972, there were only about 300,000 girls competing in their high school sports. Today, there's about 3.3 million girls competing in their high school sports. I have participated in sports my whole life, and I believe that I'm also a part of the growth that's happening in women's sports as it continues to grow every single day. For my speech, my sources are from the New York Times online and also Mother Jones, which is also an online source. Before the 1970s, men dominated sports in every way. Eventually, over time, women's participation has increased dramatically. It used to be about 70% males competing and only just about 30% or lower females competing. Today, I would like to inform you about how Title IX has changed women's participation dramatically. Also, I'm going to inform you about two sports specifically and about how they have changed, and those two sports are going to be tennis and track and field. My first point I would like to tell you about is Title IX. Title IX is a law that bans sexual discrimination in any educational program that receives federal funding. It was signed by President Richard Nixon on June 23, 1972. Title IX changed women's sports because now there has to be equal sports in every high school, college, anything like that. There needs to be equal sports, and this is huge because it used to just be very male dominant. Before Title IX, there was only about 1 in 27 high school girls competed in their high school sports that they had there. Now, every 2 out of 5 girls compete in their high school sports. Some high schools didn't even have women's sports there, and they even offered them because most teams didn't have enough girls to make an actual team there at their high school because nobody wanted to compete back then. Now there's no problem in making many teams, and nowadays they actually have to do cuts for many high school teams as to who's going to actually be on the team. There is now about 200,000 females competing at NCAA schools, which is the highest ranking colleges that you can go to. And there used to be just about 30,000, and that was also very male dominant before. Now that I told you about Title IX, I would like to inform you about how women's participation in tennis has also grew dramatically. Women's participation in tennis has changed dramatically over the last 40 years. And here's how. On September 30th, 1973, there was the Battle of the Sexes. This is when Billie King and Bobby Riggs went head-to-head. Billie King was actually a female and Bobby Riggs was a male. This was huge because no female and male had ever competed against each other. And at the time, female athletes weren't really thought of as true athletes. It was just only the men were the true athletes. Whenever Billie King defeated Bobby Riggs, this brought a lot of attention to women's sports, especially women's tennis. This became a milestone for women's sports, also women's tennis. Women's tennis is now ranked top 10 in women's sports today in participation, and it used to be just considered a men's sport, so it is a big deal now that it is ranked in the top 10 sports. Now that I've told you about tennis, I'm going to inform you about track. Track has become more of a multi-sex sport since the 1970s. Before the 1970s, it was very male dominant. Very few females actually got to compete in track meets or just any type of track and field event. In 1984, Joanne Bonitz was the first distance runner in the Olympics. This is a huge deal because the male athletes had already been competing in this race years before the females ever got to race. It was also a huge deal because she had won the Olympics and represented the USA well, and it became a huge deal in the growth of women's track and field. Nowadays, women's track and field is enjoyed at the college level and at the Olympic level just as much as the men. This past Olympics, the female track and field team received just as much TV time as the male track and field team did. This is huge because normally airtime is very uneven when it comes to male and female sports. Normally it's about 70% male and just about 30% females. And since it was almost even, it was a huge deal, and many people enjoyed watching both the women and men run this year and do their events. In conclusion, I have told you about how Title IX has affected women's sports dramatically since it was put in effect in 1972. I've also informed you about how two sports specifically have been affected by changing over time. These two sports are tennis and track and field. Now, if Title IX never came into effect, would you be where you are today?